Struggling nurse was fired for bringing her son to work until her new CEO walked in and changed everything. Under the stark fluorescence of the burn unit hallway, chaos erupted like a firestorm. Julia, her blonde hair falling in messy strands around her face, clutched her 6-year-old son Leo tightly in her arms. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, breath caught between fury and fear. 2 security guards flanked her, pushing her back against the wall, as if she were a threat rather than a mother. "My son did nothing wrong," she shouted, voice raw. "He was only trying to help a patient, not harm anyone." Her words cracked through the hallway like a whip. Across from her, Marcia, the night shift manager, stood red-faced with fury. Her clipboard shook in her hand. "She's been fired," she barked to the security team. "Her son caused a patient to pass out. That's a liability." "That's not true," Julia said, voice trembling. "Noah calmed down because of Leo. Ask anyone who was there." "You're not welcome here, Julia." "Not anymore." One of the guards grabbed Julia's elbow. She tried to twist away, still holding Leo, who had begun to cry and hiccuping sobs, his small hands clutching the fabric of her scrubs. Then came the final shove. Julia's foot slipped on the edge of the vinyl floor. She went down hard, knees scraping the ground. Her arms instinctively shielded Leo, who whimpered in fear. His cheek pressed against her chest. And that's when it happened. A voice rang out, deep, commanding, sharp as glass. "Stop! What the hell is going on here?" The hallway fell into stunned silence. From the far end of the corridor, a man walked briskly forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he moved with the kind of presence that made people step aside without being asked. Daniel Reeves, the new CEO of the hospital. His steel-gray eyes scanned the scene like a surgeon evaluating a crisis. "Someone explain," he said coolly, "why a mother and her child are being physically thrown out of a medical facility." Marcia straightened, stammering. "Mr. Reeves, this woman, was terminated for bringing a child into a restricted area. Her son entered a patient's room without permission. There was an incident." He stepped closer to Julia, who was still on her knees. She looked up at him, stunned, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For a brief second, it was as if the past few months of exhaustion, terror, and isolation paused. The silence between them held something fragile, like hope. Daniel extended his hand to her. "Are you okay?" Julia hesitated, then nodded slowly, shifting Leo in her arms as she reached for his hand. He pulled her to her feet gently, steadying her with a touch that was both strong and careful. Leo peeked up at him through red-rimmed eyes. Daniel knelt slightly, leveling with the boy. "Hey there, you must be Leo." Leo sniffled. "Are we in trouble?" "No," Daniel said firmly. "You're not, and your mom isn't either." He stood, his tone now sharp as he turned back to Marcia and the guards. "This conversation is over. Escort Mrs. Parker and her son to the staff lounge. I'll deal with this from here." "But Mr. Reeves," Marcia began. "I said I'll handle it." Marcia's lips thinned into a tight line, but she nodded, stepping aside. Daniel looked back to Julia. "You both look like you could use a minute to breathe. Come with me." Julia clutched Leo tighter. She didn't know this man, but for the first time in a long time she didn't feel like she had to keep standing alone. She followed. The lounge Daniel brought them to was quiet, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Julia sat on the worn leather couch, her arms wrapped tightly around Leo, who had finally stopped crying but refused to let go of her. Daniel stood across from them, arms folded, watching the mother and son without a trace of judgment in his eyes. "I just need a minute," she murmured, not quite looking at him. "Take all the time you need," he said gently, then stepped out of the room to give them space. As the door closed, Julia let her head fall back against the wall. Her eyes drifted to the ceiling, but her mind was somewhere far away, somewhere filled with smoke and flames. It had started on a Sunday night. The apartment she and her husband had rented for years, the one Leo was born in, caught fire from an electrical short. By the time Julia had grabbed Leo and made it outside, half the building was gone. Her husband didn't make it out. After the funeral, she tried to hold it all together. Rent money was gone. Bills piled up. They ended up in a tiny basement unit 3 blocks from the hospital. The nights were the worst. Leo would scream in his sleep, flinch at the sound of microwave beeps, refuse to sleep without the closet light on. Julia couldn't afford full-time childcare, especially not for a boy with trauma-induced anxiety. The waiting list for affordable therapy was 8 months long, so she did the only thing she could think of. She brought him with her. Not every night, just the ones where she had no one else to turn to. She'd fix a little bed in the nurse's break room with a soft blanket, his favorite stuffed elephant, and a pair of headphones that played rain sounds. Sometimes he slept, sometimes he didn't, but at least she could see him, check on him between patients, whisper to him when he whimpered in his sleep. She never meant to cause trouble, but trouble always seemed to find her. From day one, Marcia had it out for her. She never said it outright, but Julia could feel it, the way her tone shifted when addressing her, the look she gave during meetings, the little digs about emotional nurses. She called her out in front of others for being too attached to patients, for spending too much time reading to kids when there were charts to update. Julia tried to comply. She cut back on story time. She left Leo home a few times, until the night he had a full-blown panic attack, curled under the kitchen table, unable to breathe. His face had gone blue. She'd barely gotten him to the ER in time. That night, she swore she'd never leave him alone again. So she came up with a routine. Leo came with her, stayed tucked away, quiet and safe. Not once did he interrupt a procedure. Not once did he interfere. And she was fired for bringing her child to work with her. Morning light barely touched the hallway as Julia walked slowly, a cardboard box clutched to her chest. Inside were her belongings: stethoscope, a photo of Leo in his superhero cape, and a coffee mug painted with Nurse Julia in shaky child handwriting. Leo walked beside her, silent, holding onto her scrubs. His eyes scanned the hallway, anxious. As they neared the pediatric burn unit, the sharp sound of a child screaming cut through the air. Inside, a young boy, Noah, thrashed on a hospital bed, terrified. "Noah, please," a nurse pleaded. "We just need to help you heal," he screamed, louder, flailing. Leo stopped walking. "Sweetheart, let's keep moving," Julia began, but Leo pulled away and walked into the room. "Leo, no," she started, frozen. He sat quietly near Noah's bed, digging into his backpack. From it, he pulled a crumpled sheet of paper and unfolded it carefully. "I used to scream too," he said. Noah paused, watching. Leo laid the paper down. "This is my robot. He has fireproof arms and cold feet. He carried me out when the fire came. I draw him when I get scared." Noah's hands stopped trembling, his breathing slowed. Leo leaned closer. Like the one who'd been at the vineyard department, who taught Beth the honored trade, scrupulous conduct, management, and wisdom. The boy reached out and took the drawing, clutching it to his chest. For the first time, he lay back without crying. A quiet awe settled over the room. Julia stood just outside the doorway, watching with wide eyes. Then, "What is going on in here?" Marcia stormed in, her voice like a siren. "She's not," was just helping. He calmed Noah down. "I don't care," Marcia snapped. "You're trespassing and endangering patients." Leo retreated behind his mother. The nurses glanced at each other but said nothing. "Security!" Marcia shouted. "No," said a voice behind her. Everyone turned. Daniel Reeves stood in the doorway, calm but commanding. His gaze locked onto Leo, then to the drawing Noah still held close. "I'll handle this," he said. Marcia opened her mouth, but he silenced her with one look. Daniel stepped into the room, knelt beside the bed. "May I see your drawing?" he asked gently. Noah nodded and handed it over. Daniel studied the picture, a bold robot shielding a stick-figure boy, and turned to Julia, then Leo. He stood tall. "This child didn't endanger anyone," he said clearly. He reminded someone how to be brave. Back to the present, Julia sat with Leo in her lap, holding him close as his breathing slowed. His little fingers clung to her sleeve like ivy, even in sleep. Daniel returned with a water bottle, a blanket, and a warm towel. He handed them to her without a word, then knelt down to Leo's level, gently brushing a damp strand of hair from the boy's forehead. "He's exhausted," he said quietly. Julia nodded, tucking the blanket around Leo. "It's been a hard few months." Daniel sat in the chair across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "You don't have to explain now, but I would like to understand." Julia hesitated. Everything inside her told her to stay guarded. She had learned not to expect fairness, but something in Daniel's voice, in the way he looked at Leo as if he were more than just a liability, it disarmed her. Still, she said softly, "You know I've already been fired." "I know what Marcia said," he replied. "That doesn't make it the truth." She studied him, unsure. Daniel met her gaze with calm resolve. "Wait here. Let me see what really happened." And then he stood and walked out. Julia sat in silence, holding Leo close. Her mind was a battlefield of memories, what-ifs, and whispered fears. For a few moments, the only sound in the room was the soft whir of the ventilation and the faint thump of Leo's heart against her chest. Downstairs, Daniel entered the security office. The guard on duty stood up immediately. "Mr. Reeves, I need footage from this morning. Pediatric burn unit, treatment room 3, he said firmly. The guard hesitated, then nodded and pulled up the files. On the screen, the hallway appeared, the timestamp ticking slowly in the corner. Daniel folded his arms, eyes trained on the monitor. He saw Julia pass through, holding a cardboard box. Leo walked beside her, tiny and serious, clutching his backpack. Then, the moment. Leo stopped, looked through the open door, walked in. Daniel's jaw clenched. He kept watching. The room full of chaos, nurses trying to calm a panicked Noah. Then Leo carefully removing a paper from his bag, sitting, speaking gently. Daniel leaned in. There was no audio, but it didn't matter. The visuals said it all. A scared boy comforting another, folding hope into paper with crayon lines and childlike wisdom. Noah slowly calmed. Leo handed him the drawing, a silent exchange of bravery. Daniel's throat tightened. Then, Marcia. Storming in, arms flailing, pointing at Leo like he was a threat. Daniel paused the video. He closed his eyes for a beat, then let out a breath, one filled with both clarity and fury. "That's not a violation," he whispered to himself. He pressed play again. "That's humanity." When Daniel returned to the lounge, Julia looked up immediately. Her arms were still wrapped around Leo, who now slept soundly, his small hand curled near his cheek. She braced herself, but Daniel didn't look angry. He looked moved. He sat beside her, leaning forward slightly. "I watched everything." Her heart pounded. "And I saw your son do something no doctor or nurse could," he said. He connected. He made a scared child feel safe. Julia blinked fast. "So? You're not going to press charges or—" Daniel shook his head. "No, Julia, I'm going to clear your name." He leaned back, letting the weight of his words settle. "You were failed by the system. You were treated like a problem when you were doing everything you could with nothing, and somehow, you still made a difference." Julia looked down at Leo, then back at Daniel. Her voice cracked. "Thank you." He stood. "Get some rest. I've got work to do." As he walked to the door, she called softly, "Why are you helping us?" Daniel paused, turned halfway back. "Because kindness like that shouldn't be punished," he said. "It should be protected." The conference room filled with a low hum of conversation, papers rustling, and the shuffle of chairs being pulled back. Nurses in scrubs, doctors in white coats, administrators with tablets in hand, everyone had responded to the urgent call from the new CEO's office. Most expected another dry meeting about compliance or a restructuring update. After all, New leadership often meant change. Few anticipated anything more than policy shifts or budget realignment. What they got instead was silence. Daniel Reeves stood at the front of the room, not behind a podium, not flanked by legal advisors, but alone. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, his suit jacket draped over the back of a nearby chair. Behind him, the large screen showed a paused video still, a young boy sitting quietly beside a hospital bed, holding up a crumpled drawing. Daniel scanned the room before speaking, his voice quiet but resonant. "This," he said, gesturing to the screen, "is not a disciplinary meeting. This is a mirror, and what we see in it will define who we are." He pressed play. The room fell silent. On the screen, Leo's small figure appeared. They watched him walk into the burn unit, unprompted, unafraid. His soft movements, the way he sat down gently, the way he unfolded his drawing. They watched as the terrified patient, Noah, began to settle. His body relaxed. His panic faded. The moment when his tiny hands clutched the robot drawing to his chest was unmistakable. The video ended. Daniel turned back to the room, his expression unreadable but firm. "This child," he said clearly, "offered a trauma patient what trained professionals could not because we lacked skill, but because sometimes what heals the most is presence." Leo brought something into that room that no procedure or protocol could. He brought empathy. He brought his story, and that story saved someone. He stepped closer to the edge of the platform. "So let me ask all of you, who here believes what he did was harmful?" The silence was thick, still. Then a voice rose from the back. Marcia, her tone clipped, defensive. It was unauthorized. A child in a sterile treatment space. What if something had gone wrong? What if he'd been injured? Or worse, what if the patient had reacted badly? It was a risk. A wave of quiet murmurs rolled through the room. Discomfort, disagreement. Then one of the senior pediatric nurses stood. "With respect, Marcia," she said, "for the first time in 3 days, that boy let someone change his bandages without screaming. That didn't happen with us. It happened because Leo made him feel safe." Another added, "He didn't interfere. He connected. That's what Julia taught him, how to be gentle, how to listen." Daniel gave a small nod. "Thank you." He turned back to the front of the room, his tone unwavering. "As of this moment, Nurse Julia Parker is reinstated to her full position with no disciplinary action. She should never have been punished for choosing to be both a nurse and a mother." The applause started slowly, hesitant hands clapping. Then it grew, steady and strong. Daniel waited until it softened. "And we're not stopping there. Today we begin something new. A creative therapy room will be opened, modeled after what Leo showed us. It'll be a safe space for children to heal through expression, with art, with story, with compassion. And it will be led by Nurse Parker." This time, the applause didn't hesitate. It roared. Julia, standing near the side wall, blinked rapidly, eyes filled with tears. Daniel looked at her, not with pride, but with deep respect. A child had reminded them of something fundamental, and from that reminder, a revolution had begun. Later that week, Julia arrived early for her first day setting up the new space. She found the room freshly painted a soft blue, shelves already stocked with crayons, markers, puzzles, sensory toys. But what made her pause was the tray left on the low table near the corner. A tiny plate of pancakes, shaped like a robot. Next to it, a note, neatly folded and penned in careful print. "Breakfast for our honorary therapist, from the office upstairs." Julia smiled, blinked away the sting in her eyes. She looked around the quiet room, and for the first time in a long while, felt like she was standing in a place built from grace, not just duty. In the weeks that followed, Daniel became a quiet presence in the therapy room. Twice a week, without announcement, he'd show up. No clipboard, no agenda. He'd roll up his sleeves, sit on the tiny floor cushion, and color. Sometimes he built puzzles with the kids. Sometimes he just listened. He never made a show of it. Julia noticed the way he made space without taking space. Leo noticed too. One afternoon, Leo brought over a new drawing, a bright green robot with long arms made of flowers. "This one's for Mr. Daniel," he said. Daniel smiled, took the picture like it was priceless. "I love it." "What's his superpower?" "He helps people feel less alone," Leo said matter-of-factly. "Like you do." After that, Leo stopped calling him Mr. Daniel. He started calling him Uncle Daniel. And Daniel didn't correct him, not once. The days began to blur together. Between coordinating the new therapy space, late-night check-ins on her young patients, and still being a mother to a boy who'd seen too much fire for one lifetime, Julia rarely left the hospital before dark. Some nights she did not leave at all. She kept a small overnight bag in the staff locker room just in case. But Daniel had noticed, of course he had. Without ever announcing it, he made quiet arrangements. One evening after a double shift, Julia stepped into the staff lounge and found a folded knit blanket, a mug of steaming chamomile tea, and a lavender-scented sachet resting on the arm of a recliner. A note clipped to the tea bag read, "You're needed here," but not without rest. The detective she never asked who set it up. She never had to. Then came the night she collapsed. It was nothing dramatic, just a faint fever, a few shivers she tried to ignore. She brushed it off as fatigue, but Daniel saw her stumble near the nurse's station and caught her arm before she hit the floor. "No arguments," he said, guiding her gently toward the elevator. "You're getting checked out." She tried to protest. "I'm fine, just overworked. You take care of everyone else," he said softly. "Let someone take care of you." At the clinic downstairs, he waited outside the exam room for 2 hours. Just sat quietly, phone in hand, answering emails, sipping cold coffee. When Julia finally emerged, tired but cleared of anything serious, he stood. "I told you it was nothing," she said, managing a weak smile. "Still," he replied, "you earned a night off from pretending you're invincible." A few nights later, she drifted off during a lull in the therapy room, head resting against the beanbag chair. Leo sat nearby, surrounded by crayons and scattered papers, halfway through a new drawing. When Daniel arrived, he paused at the doorway. Julia was asleep, her breathing soft. Her hands, usually busy or clenched with stress, were completely still. Without a word, he shrugged off his blazer and laid it gently over her shoulders. Then he sat beside Leo. "What you making?" he asked. Leo held up a half-finished page. "It's a picture of Mommy and me, but the sky's too big, and I don't know what color it should be." Daniel picked up a crayon. "How about we do it together?" They colored in silence, light blue at the top, yellow around the edges like the start of sunrise. When the drawing was done, Leo signed it in big block letters. U.S. Later, as Julia stirred awake and saw them sitting there, her heart ached in the best way. She blinked, the corners of her mouth curling up as she whispered, "You two make a good team." Daniel didn't look up from the coloring sheet. "We're learning from the best." The next morning, as Julia refilled the crayon bins, she glanced at him and asked quietly, "Why are you doing all this?" Daniel leaned against the doorway, hands in his pockets. "What do you mean?" She didn't smile this time. Her voice was gentle but serious. "The tea, the blanket, the checkups, coloring with Leo. Why?" He paused, then said simply, "Because people like you make places like this matter. And I want to keep that light alive." Julia looked down, her fingers brushing over the crayon-labeled bin. When she looked back up, her eyes were misty, and Daniel, without needing any more words, nodded once, like a promise passed in silence. The light she carried hadn't gone unnoticed, and he wasn't going to let it burn out. With each passing week, Julia's confidence grew, not just as a nurse, but as a leader. She began speaking up in meetings, presenting new ideas for trauma-informed care, not just for pediatric patients, but for staff too. Her voice was steady, her words clear. Her proposals didn't come from theory, but from lived experience. That made people listen. Other hospitals called, asking for guidance. Articles were written. A quiet wave of change, sparked by one woman's refusal to quit, began to ripple across the healthcare world. Daniel never took credit. But behind the scenes, he quietly submitted a nomination to the National Healthcare Alliance. Julia Parker, Person of the Year. He didn't even tell her. One rainy afternoon, the skies opened just as Julia and Leo were leaving the hospital. Their bus was delayed. The shelter outside the main entrance leaked. Daniel's car pulled up to the curb like it was meant to be there. "Get in," he said, rolling down the window, water beating on the glass. Julia hesitated, but Leo climbed into the back seat like it was the most natural thing in the world. She followed, soaked and breathless. Back at his place, a warm, lived-in home with shelves full of books and a record player that hummed in the background, Daniel moved easily around the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, flipping grilled cheese sandwiches and warming tomato soup. No grand gestures, just quiet care. Leo nodded off at the table, his head slowly leaning to one side. Julia reached to wake him, but Daniel stopped her with a shake of his head. "I got him." He gently lifted the boy into his arms, carried him to the couch and laid him down. Then he covered Leo with a knit blanket and tucked his stuffed elephant beside him like it was part of the ritual. Julia watched from the kitchen, a spoon frozen in her hand. Daniel came back, wiping his hands on a towel. He was out before I even got to the sofa. There was a long pause. The sound of rain tapping on the windows filled the space between them. Then Daniel looked at her, really looked. "I'm not trying to replace anyone," he said, voice low. "I know there's history, grief, and that there's no shortcut through it." Julia's eyes glistened. He took a slow breath. "I just want to be here, for both of you, however you'll have me." She stepped closer, not all the way, but close enough that the space between them felt less like distance and more like choice. "I don't need someone to fix everything," she whispered. "Just someone who stays." Daniel nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." And somehow in that quiet kitchen, with rain falling outside and Leo breathing softly on the couch, something that had once been broken, he began to feel whole again. 1 year later, the therapy center was no longer just a room, it was a movement. Hospitals across the country were replicating its design and philosophy. Trauma-informed spaces inspired by the gentle courage of a child who had once drawn a robot to keep fear at bay. Julia had become more than a nurse. She had become a symbol of resilience, a quiet force for healing in a world that too often asked people to pretend they were fine. She had never set out to be a leader, yet story after story spread through the medical community, how she stayed overnight with terminally ill children so they wouldn't feel alone, how she trained new nurses with equal measures of patience and determination, how she had built an entire program from the ashes of her own grief. She had transformed sorrow into something that could help others survive and even thrive. Julia spoke at conferences, her voice soft yet unshakable as she recounted journeys of children and their families. Interviews followed, in which Daniel sat beside her, not as a hero flanking her, but as her equal, his quiet strength a steady presence. Still, despite the spotlight, every evening she returned home to the life that grounded her. The ritual of bedtime stories, a simmering pot of soup on the stove, Leo's laughter echoing in the hallway, and Daniel's soothing tone reading from books of stars and valiant explorers. By spring, the family's life had found a gentle rhythm. One evening, Daniel leaned over the stove where pancakes sizzled. "Big 7, he said, flipping one with a practiced flick. "That deserves a proper launch party." They planned it together. The invitations were lovingly crafted by Julia's hands. Glittering letters on cardstock, stars and rockets framing each one. Their theme? Space and robots. A tribute to Leo's imaginative heart. The therapy center, the very place where their journey had begun, was transformed into a galaxy of hanging planets, twinkling fairy lights, and craft tables strewn with paint, paper, and crayons. A towering robot piñata, built from recycled boxes and silver paint, stood as the centerpiece, something Leo had helped design. At the party, Julia watched Leo flit between friends, his birthday crown slipping and his cheeks flushed with excitement. She caught Daniel's eye across the room, his expression relaxed and warm, a reflection of the life they had built from fragments of fear and hope. She felt a surge of gratitude that swept back to the cold nights when everything had threatened to unravel. After shaving cream-covered cake and squeals of delight, Daniel climbed onto a low step and called for attention. The chatter hushed as he waited. "Before we wrap up," he said, voice calm but earnest, "there's one more gift." He handed Julia a small, leather-bound notebook. Thick, soft, and warm to the touch, it felt solid in her hand. She studied the cover, noticing a thin lamination framing that familiar, worn crayon drawing, Leo's first robot, its fireproof arms outstretched. Julia pressed her fingers to the cover, her breath catching. Daniel inclined his head. She flipped to the final blank page. Printed there, in Daniel's handwriting, was a single, simple line. "Let's keep building this home together. Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears. Daniel didn't kneel or speak theatrically. He just stood there, steady and resolute, as he always did when it mattered most. "I never thought healing could look like this," she whispered back. Daniel's reply was soft but certain. "Neither did I, but you made it possible." She nodded, her heart full. "Yes, yes, I will." Around them, cheers bloomed. Children cheered, friends clapped. Tears and laughter wove together in that moment of joy. Leo rushed forward, hugging them both, his robot crown askew and his grin radiant. He bounced up and down and cried, "They're a family!" Later, Julia held her hand on Daniel's arm beneath the twinkling fairy lights, watching Leo chase firefly-shaped lanterns. The therapy center, once a space to heal trauma, now hummed with celebration and possibility. From tragedy, they had built something living and bright. As they left, Leo tugged at their hands, sparkling eyes scanning the glittery paper invitations. "Can we always have space parties?" he asked, voice small but hopeful. Daniel picked him up and whispered into his ear, "Yes, buddy, as many as you want." Julia leaned into Daniel, her wedding band warm on her finger. They walked home together into the night, into a life built of simple compassion, quiet strength, and the shared belief that even borrowed time and borrowed grace could become the foundations of something real and lasting. The wedding was held a month later, not in a chapel, not in a ballroom, right in the therapy room. The walls were strung with paper flowers and hand-painted signs made by children. Crayon drawings of hearts and stars hung beside colorful garlands. It was chaotic, imperfect, and utterly beautiful. Julia wore a simple ivory dress. Her hair, now grown longer again, was pinned back with the same clip she had once worn during the hardest nights. Leo walked down the aisle ahead of her, bow tie slightly askew, carrying a ring pillow shaped like a robot. When he reached the front, he looked up at Daniel with a proud grin. "Ready, Dad?" Daniel's eyes welled with tears. He knelt and hugged the boy tightly. The ceremony was short, honest. No press, no curated photos. Just two people, surrounded by those they'd helped and those who had helped them, promising the only thing that mattered: "I choose you, every day." And in that moment, healing wasn't just something they gave others. It became their own. Afterward, as the sun began to set, the three of them walked out into the hospital garden. Each carried a balloon with a drawing clipped to its string. Leo's showed a house with big windows, stick figures smiling inside. Julia's was a sketch of the therapy room, filled with children's laughter. Daniel's was the same robot, now rebuilt, stronger, smiling. Together they released them into the sky. As the balloons drifted upward, their drawings fluttered like little flags of everything they had endured, everything they had rebuilt. On the back of Leo's, written in big crooked letters, were the words, "Home is where love stays, not where it starts." They stood there a moment longer, arms around each other. And as the last balloon disappeared into the golden light, their laughter rose up too, soft, real, and beautifully unafraid. A home built not by perfection, but by presence, and by one small boy with a robot and a heart big enough to heal them all. Thank you for watching this heartwarming story of resilience, quiet love, and the extraordinary courage of a little boy who brought a family together. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more true-to-life tales that uplift, heal, and remind us of the power of compassion in the most unexpected places. New stories premiere every week, stories of everyday heroes, of families rebuilt, of love found in the quietest moments. Don't forget to like, share, and comment below. We read every message, and your words inspire our next chapters. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep believing in second chances.